What happens when a billionaire's mistress, drunk on power, confronts the wife at a high society gala and says, "You can't stop us"? You expect tears. You expect a scene. You expect a humiliated wife to flee the party. You don't expect the wife to smile. Ellie Vance didn't just smile, she waited. Because Us was her husband, Jaden, and her new star employee, Kira. And stop was the last thing she intended to do. She wasn't just planning to stop them. She was planning to erase them. This is the story of how one woman reminded all of New York who really built the empire. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue wasn't a home, it was a statement. It was 3 floors of polished marble, glass, and air overlooking Central Park. Its walls were adorned not with family photos, but with a rotating collection of masters, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. This was the world Ellie Vance had curated, or at least the world she was credited with curating. To the public, Ellie Vance was the perfect billionaire's wife. She was the elegant, philanthropic shadow to the titan of industry, Jaden Vance, the celebrated CEO of Vance Capital Partners, VCP. Jaden was the face, the charisma. He was the one on the cover of Forbes and Fortune, the Oracle of Manhattan. Ellie, with her quiet grace and preference for the archives at the Frick over the flashbulbs of a gala, was seen as his greatest social asset, a beautiful, intelligent, and utterly passive accessory. This evening was no different. The annual Starlight benefit for the Children's Hospital, an event Ellie herself chaired, was in full swing at the New York Public Library. The room was a sea of custom Armani and whispered 8-figure deals. Jaden was holding court by the bar, a magnetic force. The market's fearful, he boomed, his voice rich and confident. And when others are fearful, we are greedy. It's that simple. Standing just beside him, basking in his reflected glory, was Kira Thorne. Kira was new, and she was brilliant, and she was, to anyone paying attention, a shark in Chanel. Jaden had discovered her at a competing firm, and, in a move that stunned the industry, hired her as VCP's Chief Strategy Officer, a position created just for her. She was 28, with razor-sharp cheekbones and an ambition that vibrated off her like heat. Ellie watched them from across the room, idly adjusting the clasp on her diamond bracelet. She saw how Kira looked at Jaden, not with admiration, but with a hungry, possessive gleam. And she saw how Jaden, a man who feasted on adoration, was devouring it. "She's a lot," a voice murmured beside her. Ellie turned. It was Arthur Covington, the only other founding partner of VCP. Arthur was old money, old wisdom, and the only person alive who knew the truth. He was the firm's silent conscience and Ellie's mentor. "She's ambitious, Arthur," Ellie said, her voice a low murmur. "Jaden likes ambition. He calls it disruptive energy. He also calls high-risk derivatives a bit of fun," Arthur grunted, sipping his scotch. "This Project Cerberus she's pushing. It's not just disruptive, Ellie. It's reckless. The leverage is astronomical. She's convinced him he's a conquistador." Ellie's gaze sharpened. Project Cerberus, the proposed acquisition of a floundering European tech conglomerate. Kira's pet project. Ellie had read the prospectus. Her assessment was the same as Arthur's. Reckless. "Jaden has always had a blind spot for flattery," Ellie said. "This isn't a blind spot, my dear," Arthur said, his eyes kind but worried. "It's a black hole. Be careful. This one, this Kira, she doesn't just want a seat at the table. She wants the whole table and the chair you're sitting in." Ellie gave him a small, placid smile. "Thank you for the warning, Arthur. I'll be sure to check my chair." She excused herself, gliding through the crowd. She smiled, she complimented dresses, she thanked donors. But her mind was already moving. Later that night, in the sterile silence of the penthouse, Jaden stumbled in, smelling of champagne and Kira's perfume. Fracas. A laughably unsubtle choice. "Incredible night, darling," he slurred, shedding his tuxedo jacket onto a $1 billion sofa. "Kira is a miracle. She's closing the pre-funding for Cerberus. We're going to make billions." "That's wonderful, Jaden," Ellie said, tying the silk belt of her dressing gown. She was in her study, a room he rarely entered. It was lined with books, not art. "I did have a look at the Cerberus file. The debt-to-asset ratio seems concerning. The target company has massive undisclosed pension liabilities." Jaden waved a dismissive hand. "Details." "Ellie, please. You're the best art curator in New York, but leave the financial engineering to us. Frankly, it's a little unattractive when you try to play business." He said it with a patronizing smile, as if letting her in on a charming secret. For 15 years, she had swallowed this. For 15 years, she had played the role of the passive wife. Because, in the beginning, she had loved him. And in the middle, she had built him. But Ellie Vance wasn't an art curator who played at business. Ellie Vance was a quantitative analyst with a PhD in applied mathematics from MIT. Ellie Vance was the one who, 20 years ago, had designed the Orion algorithm, the proprietary trading software that had been the true foundation of VCP's success. Jaden had been the charismatic business major she'd met in college. He was the salesman. She was the architect. She had agreed to stay in the background. She hated the spotlight, and he craved it. It was a perfect partnership, until it wasn't. "You're right, darling," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It must be the details. I'll stick to the paintings." He beamed, kissed her on the forehead, and headed to the bedroom. "That's my girl." The moment she heard the door close, Ellie sat down at her desk. She didn't open a laptop. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a simple, matte black terminal. No branding. No logo. She powered it on. The screen flickered to life with a simple, green text command prompt. She logged in. Her username wasn't Evance. It was Architect. She bypassed the main VCP servers, navigating through the back-end infrastructure she had built. She had ghost access to every file, every email, every keystroke within the VCP network. Jaden, in his arrogance, had forgotten who held the master keys. She started with Project Cerberus. She pulled the real files, not the glossy prospectus Kira had shown the board. Arthur was right. It wasn't just reckless. It was suicidal. The company they were buying was a house of cards, and VCP was about to guarantee its debt. It would cripple them. Why? It didn't make sense. Kira was brilliant. She wouldn't make this mistake. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Ellie's fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled Jaden's corporate expense reports. Dinner at Per Se, $2,000. Cocktails at Bemmelman's, $800. A hotel suite at the Carlyle. Ellie froze. Jaden always stayed at the plaza. He hated the Carlyle. She cross-referenced the date with Kira's calendar. JV strategy meeting. It was a classic, pathetic cliché. But the affair wasn't what made Ellie's blood run cold. She didn't care about the infidelity. That was a dull, predictable human failing. This was something else. She began to dig into Kira Thorne. She found the transfer requests, the consulting fees, the large lump sum payments being wired to an LLC. An LLC Ellie had never heard of. Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions, LLC, registered in Delaware. Ellie pulled the incorporation documents, the sole signatory, Kira Thorne. And the funding source, a series of wire transfers from a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a holding company that Ellie recognized. It was a parking account for Jaden's personal bonuses. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was paying her. Millions. Why? Ellie kept digging. And then she found it. The other plan. Project Cerberus wasn't designed to make VCP money. It was designed to fail. The plan was simple, brutal, and devastating. Kira and Jaden would use VCP's capital to buy the toxic Cerberus assets. The acquisition would fail catastrophically within 6 months, triggering the debt covenants. VCP would default. The stock would plummet to zero. The board would be wiped out. And then, Kira Thorne, using the millions Jaden had funneled to her and backed by a mystery partner Ellie couldn't yet identify, would step in. She would use Thorne strategy and acquisitions to buy VCP's entire portfolio, including the Orion algorithm, from the bankruptcy court for pennies on the dollar. It wasn't an acquisition. It was a hostile takeover, a corporate assassination, and Jaden was in on it. He was going to burn his own multi-billion-dollar empire to the ground, just to get rid of his partners, get rid of his board, and Ellie realized, get rid of her. Ellie sat back, the glow of the green screen illuminating her face. She felt no panic, no tears. The betrayal was so absolute, so audacious, that it transcended emotion. It was simply a problem to be solved. They weren't just having an affair. They were trying to steal her life's work. Jaden, the charismatic fool, thought he was building a new life with his brilliant protégé. Kira, the ambitious shark, thought she was outsmarting everyone. Ellie Vance, the architect, looked at the blueprint of their treason, and she began to draw up a new one. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Ellie Vance was the picture of serene domesticity. She finalized the seating chart for a dinner with the French ambassador. She acquired a rare Manet for the new wing of the Met. She sat with Jaden on their terrace, listening to him gush about Kira's vision. "She's just fearless, Ellie," he'd say, swirling a glass of wine. "She reminds me of me in the old days." "She sounds remarkable, darling," Ellie would reply, her eyes never leaving his. "You must be so proud to have mentored her." I am, he'd beam, puffing up with a pride that was both pathetic and suicidal. By night, Ellie was a ghost in the machine. Her command center, her study, became a war room. She slept 2 hours at a time, subsisting on black coffee and a cold, clarifying rage. She wasn't just auditing. She was building a fortress. First, she contacted Brenda Davies. Brenda was known on Wall Street as the Shark, a forensic accountant so ruthless she could find a single fraudulent penny in the Vatican's budget. "Brenda, it's Ellie Vance," she said, on a secure line at 3 a.m. "Mrs. Vance?" Brenda's voice was gravel. "This is a surprise. I thought you only handled the pretty side of the money. I need you to look at an LLC, Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions. I need to know who Kira Thorne's other partners are, the ones who aren't my husband." "That'll be expensive," Brenda said. "Find it," Ellie replied. "And expensive won't be a word you ever need to use again." Second, she called Arthur Covington. "Arthur," she said, meeting him at a secluded bench in Central Park, far from any listening devices. "They're not just being reckless. It's a coup." She laid out the entire plan: the Cerberus acquisition, the planned bankruptcy, the shell company. Arthur's face, usually so composed, turned a deep, furious red. He had given his life to this firm. The gall of that little, and Jaden, that fool. "Arthur, I need you," Ellie said, her voice calm and absolute. "Jaden has the board charmed. They think Kira is a rainmaker. When this blows up, they'll turn on him, yes, but by then it will be too late. The company will be gone. We need to stop the Cerberus deal before it's finalized." "How?" Arthur said. "He's the CEO. He and Kira have already pushed the vote through the executive committee. The board is just a rubber stamp at this point. There is a way, Ellie said, her gaze steady. Do you remember the Patronus clause? Arthur's eyes widened. My God. Ellie, you wouldn't. That's a nuclear option. It was symbolic. It was never symbolic, Arthur, Ellie said. The Patronus clause was a dormant piece of code Ellie had embedded not in the company bylaws, but in the operating system of the Orion algorithm itself. It was a failsafe she had created 20 years ago, a moral and fiduciary trigger. If the algorithm detected specific patterns of fraud, embezzlement, or gross negligence originating from the CEO's office, patterns she was now actively flagging, it would trigger two things. First, it would place a silent, system-wide freeze on all major capital outlay accounts. Second, it would automatically void the CEO's voting shares and transfer that voting power, temporarily, to the holder of the original seed capital certificate. Jaden Vance thought his father's money had started the firm. The truth, known only to Ellie and Arthur, was that Jaden's father had laughed him out of the room. The real seed money, $10 million, had come from Ellie. It was an inheritance from her grandmother, which she had funneled into the company through a blind trust, with Arthur as the proxy. The Patronus clause gave Ellie Vance, the silent wife, the power to seize control of the entire company with a single keystroke. He's about to sign the final papers for the Cerberus deal, Ellie said. The signing is at the Hamptons Gala, this Saturday. He's planning to announce it as his new legacy. What do you need me to do? Arthur asked, his voice now firm. I need you to be there, and I need you to call an emergency board meeting. Not Saturday. Sunday, 9 a.m., at the main office. No exceptions. He'll never agree to it, Arthur said. He won't have a choice, Ellie replied. The following Saturday was the annual summer soiree at their Bridgehampton estate. It was the event of the Hamptons season. Jaden was in his element, tanned and triumphant. Kira Thorne was at his side, wearing a blinding yellow dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was no longer a protégée. She was a queen holding court, and this was her coronation. Ellie, in a classic, understated navy blue gown, watched them. She had received a text from Brenda Davies an hour before. Got him. The mystery partner. It's not a who, it's a what. A rival fund. Apex Holdings, run by Marcus Blackwood, Jaden's old college rival. Kira cut a deal to sell Apex the algorithm after the bankruptcy. Jaden isn't her partner. He's her mark. She's playing him, too. Full dossier attached. Ellie felt a flicker of something. Not pity. Just a profound disappointment. Jaden wasn't even a good villain. He was just a fool being played by a better shark. At 10 p.m., Jaden and Kira, along with the Cerberus legal team, stepped into the library to sign the final documents. The deal that would ruin VCP and make them, they believed, the new gods of Wall Street. Ellie remained on the lawn, chatting with the senator. Her assistant, Maria, a quiet, fiercely loyal woman whom Kira had bullied relentlessly for weeks, approached her. Madam Vance, Maria whispered. They're in the library. The signing is happening. Thank you, Maria, Ellie said. Would you please ask Arthur Covington to join me on the West Terrace? A moment later, Arthur was by her side. It's time? Ellie nodded. She looked out at the ocean, glittering under the full moon. Jaden always loved fireworks. She took out her phone. It was not her public iPhone. It was the same black, unmarked device from her study. She opened a simple app. A single button glowed on the screen, labeled Execute Patronus. She pressed it. In the library, 5 miles away from the nearest VCP terminal, Jaden Vance put his $10,000 pen to the paper. He signed his name with a flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said, extending a hand. "Call me Jaden." Jaden grinned, grabbing a glass of champagne and handing one to Kira. "To the new VCP." "To us," Kira said, her eyes glittering. Jaden's phone buzzed, and Kira's, and the lawyer's. Simultaneously, at the main VCP office in Manhattan, a dozen red lights began flashing on the compliance servers. Jaden looked at his phone. It was a text from the VCP bank. "Funding transfer for Project Cerberus. Failed. Account frozen. Compliance trigger." "What the hell?" Jaden muttered. Kira's face went white. She was looking at an email. From VCP Legal, Automated. Subject: Emergency compliance hold. All executive accounts. "Jaden," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "What is this? What's going on?" It's a mistake," Jaden stammered, frantically dialing his CFO. "A technical glitch." But the CFO's line went straight to a new, automated message. "All VCP systems are currently under an emergency compliance audit. All executive access is temporarily suspended. This message is by order of the Board of Directors." "The board?" Jaden was shouting now. "I am the board!" His call was interrupted by an incoming one. It was Arthur Covington. "Arthur, what in God's name is going on? My accounts are frozen." "Jaden," Arthur's voice was cold steel. "An emergency meeting of the Board of Directors has been called. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., VCP headquarters. Attendance is mandatory." "I'm not coming. I'm in the Hamptons. You can't—" "Attendance is mandatory, Jaden," Arthur repeated, "or you will be removed in absentia. You and your associate, Miss Thorne." The line went dead. Jaden and Kira stared at each other, the champagne glasses forgotten. The triumph had vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The half-signed papers sat on the mahogany desk, suddenly looking like a death warrant. "What did you do?" Kira hissed at him, her eyes feral. "Did you get sloppy?" "I did nothing," he yelled. It must be Ellie, that bitch." "Ellie?" Kira let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "Your mousy little wife? The one who picks out paintings? What could she do?" The library doors opened. Ellie Vance stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright party lights. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Jaden, darling," she said, her voice light and musical. "Kira, you missed the fireworks. Is everything all right? You both look so pale." The air in the library crackled. Jaden and Kira were frozen, staring at Ellie as if she were an apparition. The lawyers and bankers, sensing a domestic explosion, began quietly gathering their papers and backing toward a side door. "Ellie, what is this?" Jaden tried to regain his footing, puffing his chest out. "You have no right to interrupt this. This is a private signing." "It was," Ellie said, gliding into the room. She placed the 2 champagne flutes on the table, right next to the now voided Cerberus contracts. "But it seems the party's over. Arthur Covington just called an emergency board meeting. Something about— what was the term? Gross financial malfeasance. Sounds so dramatic, doesn't it?" Jaden's face went from pale to purple. You did this! You stuck your nose into my business." "Our business, Jaden?" Ellie corrected him, her voice still infuriatingly calm. She turned her gaze to Kira. "And your business too, Ms. Thorne. Thorne Strategy and Acquisitions, LLC. A very ambitious name, registered in Delaware. Such a proactive move for a new employee." Kira's mask of terror shattered, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. The game was up, and she knew it. The only play left was to attack. She stepped forward, her yellow dress a slash of color in the dark room. She was taller than Ellie, younger, and she used every inch of it, crowding Ellie's space. You think you're clever, don't you? Kira sneered. Going through my private files, you pathetic, jealous relic. You think freezing one account stops anything? I don't know what you're talking about, Ellie said, adopting a look of perfect, wounded innocence. Oh, stop it! Kira shrieked, her voice cracking. Stop pretending to be the fragile little wife. We know you did this. But it doesn't matter. She grabbed Jaden's arm, yanking him to her side. He looked like a bewildered ox. It's over, Ellie, Kira announced, her voice rising, loud enough for the departing lawyers to hear. Do you understand me? It's over. He doesn't love you. He loves me. He's leaving you. We were going to do this quietly, let you keep your paintings and your sad little charities. But you forced our hand. Jaden, caught between two apex predators, finally found his voice, siding with the one he thought held the power. She's right, Ellie, he said, his voice a pathetic attempt at authority. This has been over for a long time. Kira and I, we're together. We are the future of this company. So just stop. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Kira saw Ellie's placid expression and mistook it for weakness. She mistook the calm for surrender. Drunk on her own perceived victory, she moved in for the kill. She leaned in, her face inches from Ellie's. Her voice dropped to a triumphant, venomous whisper. He's mine. The company is mine. You are nothing. And there is not a single thing you can do to stop it. You can't stop us. There it was. The moment. The pivot on which the rest of their lives would turn. Jaden and Kira waited for the explosion. They expected the tears, the screams, the accusations. They expected the satisfying drama of a woman broken. Instead, Ellie Vance held Kira's gaze, and she did the single most terrifying thing she could have done. She smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a bitter smile. It was a small, tight, analytical smile. It was the smile of a mathematician who had just watched her opponent make a fatal, elementary error in their calculations. It was a smile of profound, cold, and absolute certainty. Is that so? Ellie said, her voice no more than a breath. She looked at Kira, then at her husband. She held that smile for 3 long, agonizing seconds. Thank you both for confirming, she said, as if they had just clarified a dinner reservation. Well, I really must get back to my guests. The Prime Minister is waiting. She turned, her navy blue gown rustling. Enjoy the rest of the party, she said over her shoulder. The drive back to the city is dreadful on a Sunday. You should probably leave soon if you want to make the 9 a.m. meeting. She walked out of the library, leaving an Arctic chill in her wake. Jaden and Kira were left standing alone in the silent room. The bravado evaporated, leaving only Kira's hissed, "What was that?" She's bluffing," Jaden said, but he was already sweating through his linen suit. "She's trying to scare us." "That wasn't a bluff," Kira said, her mind, for the first time, racing with genuine fear. "That was something else." "What does she know, Jaden?" "She knows nothing," he roared, panicked. "She's a socialite. She buys art and plans parties. She doesn't know the first thing about the Patronus clause or the algorithm." "The what?" Kira asked, her head snapping toward him. "The what clause?" Jaden's face went utterly blank with horror. He had just made his second fatal mistake. "Nothing," he stammered. An old piece of code. It's nothing." Kira stared at him. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute, useless idiot. She's been playing you. She's been playing both of us." Kira grabbed her phone and sprinted from the room, frantically dialing Marcus Blackwood at Apex Holdings. "Marcus, we have a problem. A real problem. The wife. I think the wife is architect." The line was silent for a moment. Then Blackwood's cold voice came through. "If Ellie Vance is architect, Ms. Thorne, then you are not in a problem. You are in a liquidation. Do not contact me again." The line went dead. Kira Thorne stood on the immaculate lawn of the Hamptons estate, the party's laughter drifting over her, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be well and truly, and completely, finished. While Kira and Jaden were descending into a spiral of panicked accusations, Ellie Vance was not celebrating. She was working. She had excused herself from the party, claiming a sudden migraine, a plausible lie that earned her sympathetic nods. Her assistant, Maria, drove her not back to the city, but to a small private airfield in West Hampton. A helicopter was waiting. "Maria," Ellie said, climbing in. "Go back to the party. Pack up the guest rooms, all of Mr. Vance's personal belongings. Send them to his new office, the one Kira leased for Thorne Strategies on Water Street. He'll need a change of clothes." "Yes, Madam Vance," Maria said, her face grimly satisfied. "And Maria, you're no longer my assistant." Maria's face fell. "You're my new chief of staff. I'll need you at the office at 7 a.m. A slow, bright dawn of a smile spread across Maria's face. "I'll be there at 6. Ellie was back in her penthouse study by 1:30 a.m. The city was quiet. She was joined as planned by 2 people, Arthur Covington, looking rumpled but resolute, and Brenda the Shark Davies, the forensic accountant, who looked like she had just been mainlining espresso and righteous fury. She was carrying a stack of binders 3 feet thick. "Good evening, Ellie," Brenda said, dropping the binders on the desk with a thud that shook the room. "Or good morning. You, my dear, have been married to the stupidest criminal in New York history." "Jaden isn't a criminal, Brenda," Ellie said, pouring coffee. "He's a narcissist. Kira is the criminal." 6 of 1, Brenda grunted, opening the first binder. "Here's the fun part. Your husband wasn't just sleeping with Ms. Thorne, and he wasn't just paying Ms. Thorne. He was being blackmailed by Ms. Thorne." Ellie paused, the coffee pot in her hand. "What?" "Oh yeah," Brenda said, tapping a document. "Kira didn't just stumble onto this Project Cerberus deal. She's been working with Marcus Blackwood at Apex for 6 months before she ever even met Jaden. She was a Trojan horse. She targeted him, got him into let's call it a very compromising position in a hotel in Geneva. Photos, videos, the whole 9 yards. Ellie closed her eyes. It was even uglier than she'd imagined. "So Kira blackmailed him into hiring her?" Arthur asked, disgusted. "Not at first," Brenda said. "At first it was just a classic honey trap. She had him. Then she pitched him the Cerberus deal. Jaden, darling, we can have it all. We can burn this company, take the algorithm and build our own new empire. We'll be gods." He, being an idiot in love, agreed. He thought it was his idea. "He was co-conspirator," Ellie said, processing. "He was," Brenda agreed, "until about 3 weeks ago, when he got cold feet. He realized that burning the company meant facing the SEC. He tried to back out, and that's when Kira showed him the Geneva photos. She switched from partner to blackmailer. She forced him to go through with the signing tonight. He was trapped. He was going to lose his company, his wife, and his reputation either way. This way, he thought he might at least end up with the girl. And she, Ellie finished, was planning to take the algorithm, feed him to the SEC, and run straight to Marcus Blackwood. A perfect triple cross, Brenda grinned. She's a hell of a player. I almost respect her. So the Patronus clause. It wasn't just for his affair or the financial malfeasance, Arthur said, looking at Ellie. It was for the blackmail, the coercion. The clause was for any threat to the integrity of my algorithm, Ellie said coldly. He became a threat. She is a threat. They are a cancer, and tomorrow we cut them out. It's all here, Ellie, Brenda said, tapping the binders. Wire transfers, the blackmail files, which I recovered from Kira's deleted cloud storage, the contracts with Apex Holdings, the real Cerberus financials, which show she wasn't just buying a failing company, she was personally shorting its stock before she even pitched the deal. A clear case of market manipulation. She's not just facing termination, she's facing 20 years in federal prison. And Jayden? Ellie asked. Jayden is the world's most pathetic victim, Brenda sighed. He's guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, yes. But a good lawyer will paint him as Kira's dupe. He'll be ruined. He'll lose his license. He'll be a pariah. But he'll probably stay out of jail. Ellie was silent for a full minute. She looked at the evidence, the ugly, sordid, pathetic story of her husband's downfall. All right, she said. Her voice was final. Brenda, you've done a masterful job. Have these binders copied. One for every member of the board. One for the SEC and one for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. With pleasure, Brenda smiled. Arthur, Ellie turned to her mentor. You know the board. General Harrison will be angry about the dishonor. The Duchess will be furious about the risk. They will all be terrified of a scandal. They'll want to bury it, Ellie, Arthur warned. They'll want to fire Kira quietly, let Jayden retire for health reasons. They'll want to protect the firm's name. They'll want you to go back to being the quiet wife, to keep the illusion. I know, Ellie said. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the first grey light of dawn break over the city. They think the firm's name is Vance. They're about to be reminded that the firm's foundation is architect, and the architect is done with illusions. She turned back, her face set. Let's go to work. We have a board meeting to prepare. At 8:45 a.m. on Sunday, the main boardroom on the 50th floor of the VCP building was tense. The full board was present, a rare occurrence. They had been flown in on private jets, summoned by Arthur Covington with a one-line message. The integrity of the firm is at stake. There was General Marcus Harrison, a retired four-star general whose presence lent an air of old-world gravity. There was the Duchess of Ashworth, an early European investor who rarely spoke, but whose opinion held immense weight. There were 3 other senior partners, all looking confused and furious at having their weekends interrupted. They were all murmuring, asking Arthur what was going on. Arthur simply said, "You will see." At 8:55 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Jayden Vance and Kira Thorne stormed in. They had clearly driven through the night. Jayden's linen suit was a road map of wrinkles. Kira had tried to repair her makeup, but her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. They looked less like executives and more like fugitives. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this?" Jayden blustered, trying to take his usual seat at the head of the table. "My accounts are frozen. You've cost us the Cerberus deal. You're going to be hearing from my lawyers." Kira, trying a different tactic, adopted a look of strained professionalism. "Gentlemen, Duchess, I apologize for this internal drama. There has been a misunderstanding, a technical glitch. We can have the Cerberus deal back on track by Monday." "Please, sit down, Ms. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice cutting through her. "Both of you. Over there." He pointed to 2 chairs on the side, away from the main table. The guest chairs. "I will not be," Jayden began. "Sit down." General Harrison's voice was a parade ground command that made Jayden flinch and, instinctively, sit. Kira, seeing she had no choice, sat stiffly beside him. The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked to 9 a.m. The main boardroom doors opened again. Ellie Vance walked in. She was not dressed for a gala or a charity lunch. She was wearing a perfectly tailored dark grey power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She was flanked by Brenda Davies, who was pushing a trolley loaded with binders, and two men in dark suits whom the board did not recognize, the firm's external legal counsel. "Ellie." The Duchess's voice was sharp. "What is this? Has something happened to Jayden?" Jayden shot up. "She's behind this. This is a domestic dispute. She's hysterical. She has no right to be here." "On the contrary, Mr. Vance," the lead lawyer, a man named Peter Finch, said. "She is the only reason you are not already in federal custody." Ellie walked to the head of the table, to Jayden's chair, and remained standing. She did not look at her husband. She addressed the board. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the abrupt summons. My name is Ellie Vance. For 20 years you have known me as Jayden's wife, but today I am here as architect." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The Duchess and General Harrison stared at her. They knew the legend of architect, the anonymous quant genius who had founded the company, but they had all been led to believe it was a partner who had died years ago. "And," Ellie continued, her voice resonating with cold authority, "as of 10:05 p.m. last night, under the Patronus clause of the VCP Charter, I have assumed temporary, absolute control of this company." That's a lie," Jayden sputtered. "The Patronus clause is a myth." "It is very real, Mr. Vance," Peter Finch interjected, as his team began placing a thick binder in front of each board member. "It was triggered by a systemic pattern of conspiracy, fraud, and corporate malfeasance, originating from your office and that of Ms. Thorne." Kira Thorne spoke, her voice shaking but defiant. "You have no proof. This is slander. I will sue you. I will sue this entire board." "Proof?" Brenda Davies stepped forward, her voice dripping with scorn. "Page 1, Ms. Thorne. Your employment contract with Apex Holdings, signed 6 months ago. Page 10, the real financials for Cerberus. Page 12, your wire transfers to an offshore account, shorting Cerberus stock. Page 30, the full transcript of your blackmail threats against Mr. Vance, including audio files." Jayden went white. "And for the board," Brenda continued, "page 50, the full detailed plan to bankrupt this company, defraud its shareholders, and sell its primary asset, the Orion algorithm, to a competitor for a fraction of its value. All orchestrated by Miss Thorne, with Mr. Vance as her unwilling and, frankly, idiotic accomplice." The room was utterly silent. The board members stared, stunned, at the files. General Harrison, a man who had seen combat, looked physically ill. "Jayden," the Duchess whispered, her voice horrified. "Is this true?" Jayden couldn't speak. He just stared at Ellie, his expression a mask of disbelief and hatred. Ellie finally turned her gaze to him. It was not the gaze of a wife, it was the gaze of a CEO. "Jayden, for 20 years I gave you my work. I gave you my name. I gave you my trust. And you, in your weakness and your ego, conspired to steal it. You brought a viper into my house." She then turned to Kira, who was trembling, her mask of defiance gone, replaced by the raw terror of a cornered animal. "And you, Ms. Thorne, you saw this firm, this man, this life, and you thought you could just take it. You thought I was a fragile painting on a wall. You mistook my silence for weakness. You mistook my grace for stupidity." Ellie looked back at the board. "The board has 2 options, a quiet retirement for Mr. Vance and a quiet termination for Miss Thorne, which will invite shareholder lawsuits and an SEC investigation that will tear this firm apart. Or we can choose option 2. What is option 2? General Harrison asked, his voice grim. Ellie stood to her full height. Option 2. We excise the cancer. Completely. We restructure. We report this ourselves. We hand Kira Thorne and her conspiracy to the U.S. Attorney on a silver platter. We demonstrate our integrity. And I, she finished, take my rightful place as CEO of this company. A new silence, this one of calculation. The board looked from the damning files to Jaden's pathetic, broken form, to Kira's terrified one, and then to the poised, powerful woman at the head of the table. It wasn't a choice. It was a coronation. A vote, Arthur Covington said, his voice booming. All in favor of accepting the Patronus transition, of terminating Ms. Thorne for cause, and of installing Ellie Vance as the new Chief Executive Officer of Vance Capital Partners, effective immediately. Every hand went up. The vote was done. The shift in power was absolute. Jaden Vance was no longer a CEO. He was just a man in a rumpled suit, sitting in a guest chair. He seemed to shrink. "Ellie, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't do this. Think of our life, our legacy. We built this together. You can't just take it." "I am not taking anything, Jaden," Ellie said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I am reclaiming what was always mine. You were a steward, and you failed." Kira, however, was not done. Seeing her future in flames, prison, lawsuits, utter ruin, she snapped. The terror was replaced by a final, desperate, burning rage. She lunged to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor. You bitch!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the pristine, soundproofed room. "You think this is a victory? You'll be nothing. He made you. Without him, you're just a sad, empty woman in a penthouse. You'll run this company into the ground in 6 months." She jabbed a finger at Jaden. "And you weak, pathetic fool. I gave you a chance to be a king, and you let your wife put a leash on you." "Ms. Thorne," General Harrison said, his voice a low warning. "That is enough. It's not enough." Kira was hysterical now, tears of pure fury streaming down her face. "You can't do this. You can't just erase me. We were—" Ellie watched her. She let the tirade burn itself out. She let the room absorb the full, ugly spectacle of Kira's disintegration. When Kira was finally reduced to heaving, ragged sobs, Ellie walked calmly around the table until she was standing directly in front of them both. She looked at Kira. "You told me, in my own home, that I couldn't stop you." She then looked at her husband. "And you believed her." Ellie Claes Vance spread her hands in front of her. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was not the voice of a wife or a victim. It was the voice of an executioner. "Jaden, you're fired. Kira, you're fired." She nodded to the doors. As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They were not the regular VCP guards. They were from Ellie's own private detail. "Please escort Mr. Vance and Miss Thorne from the premises," Ellie ordered. "They are to take nothing but the clothes they are wearing. Their corporate accounts, their building access, their email. Everything has already been deactivated. They are no longer employees of this firm." "Ellie, no!" Jaden cried out, as a guard took his arm. "You can't. This is my name on the wall." "Your name," Ellie said, "is a liability. Security, please." The guards began to physically move them toward the door. Kira was silent now, her body rigid with shock. Jaden was a babbling, pleading mess. As they reached the elevator bank, the doors to the executive suite opened, and Maria, Ellie's new chief of staff, stepped out. She was holding a single, small, brown cardboard box. She walked past the struggling Kira and stopped in front of Jaden. She held out the box. "Mr. Vance," Maria said, her voice clear and professional. "Your personal effects." Jaden, bewildered, looked inside. The box contained 3 items: a half-dead succulent that Kira had told Maria to throw out weeks ago, a small framed photo of Jaden and Ellie from their wedding, which he had replaced in his office with a magazine cover of himself, and a cheap, ceramic, world's best boss mug his first assistant had given him 20 years ago. It was the ultimate, crushing humiliation. The sum total of his legacy. Jaden stared at the box, and something inside him finally, truly, broke. He stopped fighting. The guards led him into the elevator, a hollow shell of a man. Kira gave Ellie one last look, a look of pure, toxic hatred that promised 1,000 years of revenge. Ellie just met her gaze, unblinking, until the elevator doors slid shut. Ding. They were gone. Ellie turned back to the boardroom. The board was silent, watching her. She walked back to the head of the table. She straightened her suit jacket. She looked at her new board of directors, her face all business. "Ladies and gentlemen," CEO Ellie Vance said, "we have a lot of work to do. Let's talk about the future." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Wall Street Journal headline the next morning screamed, "Vance Capital Shakeup, CEO Jaden. Vance out, wife Ellie Vance in. Architect revealed." The story of the socialite wife, who was secretly the firm's quant genius, was an international sensation. But Ellie Vance had no time for media. She was in cleanup mode. Her first act as CEO was an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the atrium, terrified, expecting mass layoffs. Ellie stood before them, not with the false charisma of Jaden, but with the quiet, intense focus of a surgeon. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Ellie Vance. You knew me as Mrs. Vance. Today I am your CEO. Let's not waste time. Vance Capital Partners was built on 2 things: integrity and intellect. We have, for a short time, been lacking in both." She laid out her plan. "Project Cerberus is dead. All assets related to it are being unwound. Our firm is cooperating fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC regarding the criminal actions of Kira Thorne." A gasp went through the crowd. There will be no retirements. There will be no golden parachutes. We do not reward failure or fraud. Ms. Thorne has been terminated for cause. Mr. Vance has been terminated for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. The shock in the room was palpable. It was a public execution. "But this," Ellie continued, her voice rising, "is not an end. It is a cleansing. Jaden Vance's vision was reckless. Kira Thorne's was criminal. My vision is the one that built this firm. We are returning to the Orion principles. We will be smarter, faster, and more transparent. Anyone who was part of Ms. Thorne's inner circle of sycophants, your keycards will not work this afternoon. Anyone who is here to work, to build, and to win, your real work starts now." She didn't smile. She didn't ask for questions. She just nodded and walked off the stage. The message was clear. The party was over, and the master was home. The financial world, expecting VCP to collapse, watched in awe. Ellie didn't just stabilize the firm, she made it thrive. She cut all the toxic, high-leverage cowboy projects Jaden had loved. She reinvested heavily in the Orion algorithm. She launched a new multi-billion-dollar green energy fund that was both ethical and massively profitable. Within 6 months, VCP's stock was up 30%. And what of Jaden and Kira? Kira Thorne's case was swift. Faced with Brenda Davies' mountain of evidence, the blackmail, the market manipulation, the conspiracy, she had no defense. Marcus Blackwood and Apex Holdings cut a deal and testified against her to save their own skins. She was found guilty on multiple counts, including wire fraud and conspiracy, and sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Jaden Vance was ruined. The divorce was quiet and brutal. Ellie kept everything: the penthouse, the art, the company. Jaden, stripped of his licenses and his reputation, was left with a single, small bank account Ellie had forgotten to freeze, containing just enough for him to rent a small apartment in New Jersey. He became a ghost, a where-are-they-now cautionary tale. The final scene took place 1 year later. Ellie was in her office, the CEO's office. It was redecorated. The heavy mahogany and animal heads Jaden loved were gone. It was now minimalist, clean, and dominated by a single, massive data screen showing global market flows. Her chief of staff, Maria, walked in. "Madam Vance," Maria said. "2 items. First, the U.S. Attorney's Office called. Kira Thorne's final appeal was denied. She's been transferred to the federal prison in Danbury." Ellie nodded, her eyes not leaving the data screen. "Thank you." "Second," Maria continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "Forbes is on line 1. They have finalized their list for the world's most powerful women. You are on the cover. They need to schedule the photo shoot." Ellie finally looked up. She looked past Maria, out the window, at the New York skyline, a city of sharks and kings. She had been a wife, a shadow, and a ghost. Now she was the queen. She didn't smile. She just nodded, all business. "Tell Forbes I can give them 20 minutes on Tuesday. Now patch me through to the Tokyo Fund. I want to talk about our new acquisition." The empire was stable, stronger, and unequivocally, unassailably hers. The empire was hers. The power was hers. The victory was hers. Jaden and Kira learned the hard way. Never, ever underestimate the person who signs the checks and who wrote the code that makes the checks. They thought they were taking over a company. They forgot they were just employees in Ellie's world. What did you think of Ellie's ultimate power move? What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. If you love stories of justice and ultimate revenge, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true-life dramas every single week. Don't miss what's coming next.